Cops. What's a call that started as the scariest night of your career and ended with the whole department crying from laughing? I was 3 months out of the academy, posted to a county so quiet, our biggest case all year was a stolen lawn gnome that turned up 2 weeks later in a different family's garden. Early that shift, dispatch took a call from some guy stranded out on Route 9. Our dispatcher was this woman named Dot, who'd run the radio for 30 years and could calm down a tornado. The guy said he'd hit a deer and needed a tow. Dot told him the truth. The tow company was an hour out, and we had exactly 1 cruiser on the road. Sit tight, hun. Could be a while. He said okay and hung up. We forgot about him in about 4 seconds. Then around 11, everything happened at once. First call. A woman on Sycamore Street whispering so low Dot could barely hear her. There's a man at my door. He's enormous. He's covered in blood. He keeps saying he needs to come inside. Before Dot could even get me rolling, the board lit up like Christmas. Second call. Third call. Fourth. Same street. And the reports got worse every single time. One neighbor swore the man was dragging a body across the lawn. Another said he had a weapon, maybe an axe. Mrs. Tillman at the end of the block called to report that the stranger had the dead eyes of a serial killer and that she had already locked herself in the bathtub armed with a curling iron. Now you have to understand, in a town this size, a bloody axe man going door to door is basically the Super Bowl. Dot's voice came over the radio doing something I had never once heard it do in 3 months. Panicking. Within minutes, every unit in the county was rolling. Both of our cruisers. The sheriff, who had been dead asleep, showed up in pajama pants and a duty belt. The next county over sent backup. Somebody called the state police, who scrambled an actual helicopter. And our one and only K9, a beagle named Biscuit, who had never apprehended anything tougher than a dropped hot dog, was proudly deployed. We rolled onto Sycamore in a convoy, lights painting every house red and blue, my hands shaking on the wheel. This was it. The thing they trained us for. The thing that never, ever happened here. And there, standing in the middle of the street, lit up by a spotlight from a genuine helicopter, was the man. He was huge, easily 6.5 feet tall, and he was, in fact, absolutely drenched in blood. Shirt, arms, hands, all of it dark red and glistening under the lights. 40 years of combined small-town law enforcement leveled their weapons at this one guy. Hands! Get your hands up! The man slowly raised his hands. In one of them was a phone with a cracked black screen. He blinked into the spotlight, looked at the helicopter, looked at the beagle, looked at the sheriff standing there in his pajamas, and in the calmest, most exhausted voice you have ever heard a human being use, he said, is one of you a tow truck? His name was Bo. Bo had hit a deer out on Route 9, a big one, and he'd done the decent thing and pulled the animal off the road so nobody else would crash into it, which is precisely how a man ends up covered head to toe in blood, hauling what 4 separate witnesses confidently described as a body. The axe was a tire iron. The dead eyes belonged to a man who had been awake for 19 hours. His phone had just enough battery for 1 call before it died, so he'd used it on us, and when Dot told him a tow would take an hour, he figured he'd walk to the nearest house and politely ask to borrow a phone to call his wife. Except every single door he knocked on, people took one look at the giant covered in blood and slammed it in his face, so he'd move to the next house, and the next. 9 houses. He wasn't threatening a soul. He was just a tired, bloody, gentle man who desperately wanted to use a telephone, getting a little more frantic at each door, which of course only made him look more like the opening scene of a horror movie. It took us 10 minutes to convince Biscuit to stop trying to lick the blood off his shoes. The sheriff lowered his weapon and what was left of his dignity, and as I walked Bo over to my cruiser to drive him home, I asked him the only question I had left. Bo, man, you called us 40 minutes ago. Why didn't you just wait for the tow? He looked up at the helicopter still circling overhead, then back down at me and said, I did wait. You told me an hour. Took me knocking on 9 doors to figure out all I had to do to get 40 cops out here in 6 minutes was look a little worse.